From the north, they came on in a wave of terror. Their reign lasted nearly 3 centuries. The Vikings. But who remembers that one of them, a young warrior banished from Norway, forever changed French history?
Normans!
He remains mysterious because we don't have much information on him.
The Franks!
This person is only known from a Latin source.
Yet, he was a person of considerable importance.
He was chased away by his peers and went looking for a lost paradise.
For decades, historians and passionate medieval researchers have retraced the steps of this forgotten hero. Exploring rare archives, cross-checking sources, visiting places he frequented, they made their way through the mysteries and falsehoods surrounding his destiny.
He was nicknamed the Walker, under the pretext that he was so large in size that no horse could carry him, or perhaps because he was a vagabond who wandered incessantly.
He had this desire to settle in a territory.
He was a man who reconciled everything: war and diplomacy, Norse deities and the Christian god, exile and integration.
He was the only Viking leader who succeeded in building a lasting political foundation.
This is the story of Rollo, the Viking leader who founded Normandy. Around 1000 AD, Canon Dudo of Saint-Quentin was the first to reveal the existence of Rollo. Today, at the Library of Rouen, Aurélie Lapre keeps watch over a real treasure, one of the 4 11th century manuscripts of Historia Normanorum, the history of the Normans.
This is the manuscript. It's a copy of the original, since the printing press didn't exist at the time. This work was commissioned by Richard I, Rollo's grandson, from Dudo of Saint-Quentin. He asked him to write the history of the Normans. There are very few testimonies of the history of the Vikings, so this document is exceptional, both for the history of Normandy and its constitution, and also for the history of the Vikings, their expansion in Europe, and their conquest of the Frankish territory. The manuscript contains 4 books. The second is dedicated to Rollo, a figure who is a bit forgotten in the history of Normandy to the benefit of William the Conqueror. Yet he plays a fundamental role in the history of the conquest of Normandy and in Normandy's history in general.
Founder of the Office Universitaire des Études Normandes, Pierre Bouet is one of the few contemporary historians to have written a biography of Rollo. He knows all the subtleties of his story.
To reconstruct the history of Rollo, one is forced to rely on 2 types of source. First a Latin source, that of Dudo of Saint-Quentin, who wrote a century after the fact, and who gathered a collection of testimonies of those who had known either the immediate descendants of Rollo or his grandsons. The second source is that of the sagas, the Icelandic legends, which were written in the 13th century, but reported extremely faithful traditions. The mixing of these Latin sources and the sagas allows us to reconstruct a probable history of Rollo.
Rollo was probably born in 856 AD, here in these northern lands, fragmented by small Scandinavian kingdoms. It is in Norway that we find his first traces. After the death of his father, he was in his 20s, and he inherited many lands that made him a powerful local lord. Was he too powerful, perhaps? Too young? Too ambitious for the powers that be? The first king of Norway, Harald Fairhair, wanted to regain his kingdom, which was plagued by internal struggles between mostly autonomous small counties. Therefore, everything became a pretext to remove his opponents. One morning, Harald had Rollo arrested to appear before the Thing, the assembly where quarrels and local conflicts were judged. The sentence was given, and Rollo experienced his first great trauma.
In particular, Harald promulgated a law that prohibited looting in his territory, and Rollo went ahead and contravened the law. And then, afterwards, Harald Fairhair decided to sentence Rollo, his brother, and their companions to exile.
You are banned.
Banishment, the worst sentence that could be inflicted on a Viking. To be expelled from the homeland, with no hope of ever returning, was a punishment as harsh as death.
Overnight, Rollo lost everything. He had a superb paternal patrimony, but everything was taken away from him after this event. Thus, he was driven out of Norway. This was the beginning of his wandering.
Where to, Rollo? To the west, to a new land.
Exiled, but carried by the pride and instinct of life that would always define his character, Rollo took to the sea. His future was born of an affront, his destiny was founded in exile.
I think that the exceptional destiny of Rollo resulted from his banishment. He left, chased away by his peers, and went looking for a lost paradise.
He took to the sea, but where did he go? If the Nordic legends are to be believed, Rollo set sail for the Hebrides, south of the Scottish seas. But if we believe Dudo of Saint-Quentin's version and his History of the Normans, Rollo reached England and fought twice against the English. Jean Renaud, Professor Emeritus of Scandinavian Languages, Literature and Civilization, has been following these two theories for years. Having lived in the Shetland Islands, he knows the history of the British archipelagos in Viking times.
According to Dudo of Saint-Quentin, Rollo was the son of a high-ranking Danish chief who, upon the death of his father and brother, also went into exile. But he went to England. He set sail for England because England was the main destination of the Danish Vikings. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mentioned this great army of pagans who came to plunder England and who conquered, little by little, the different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, with the exception of Wessex, where King Alfred fiercely resisted. Most likely, Rollo then joined the great heathen army, which left England for the continent.
Did Rollo stay in England? Did he also live in the Hebrides? Was he actually Norwegian or Danish? All the charm, interest, and appeal of studying his exceptional destiny lies in this treasure hunt, this meticulous and uncertain quest for clues. Even today, historians seek to shed light on the shadows, to retrace his path in British lands. But one thing is certain. Rollo the Banished, Rollo the Vagabond, returned to the sea and set sail for France. By choosing to reach the Frankish shores, he followed in the footsteps of a large number of Viking warriors and merchants before him. For decades, the Vikings, in search of new resources, led raids and expeditions within the Carolingian Empire. Rollo followed the example of his peers. Historian François Neveu, a specialist in medieval Normandy, devoted part of his research to these Nordic breakthroughs in Carolingian lands.
The first Viking incursions took place around the year 800, about a century before the arrival of Rollo. At that time, Charlemagne was the king of the Franks, and he firmly organized the defense. He set up guard posts along the coast, on the Seine, and he also created a fleet.
Many stories, often terrifying, tell of these first waves of Vikings, which more than a century before Rollo swept over the coasts of the Channel and the Atlantic. The Vikings advanced, and in the face of weak opposition, went upriver to the heart of the Frankish kingdom.
The Vikings initially chose to settle on islands located in the estuaries of large rivers, such as those of the Loire and the Seine. From there, they launched raids on both banks of these rivers, and they either looted and pillaged the villages, or forced the authorities to pay them a tribute.
From the fury of the Normans, free us, Lord. In his History of the Normans, Duke of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte describes the Vikings as follows. They rumble around the surrounding walls like a wolf around the sheepfold. They ignore the Franks, who fear, locked in their fortresses. They go after everyone, like the lion in pursuit of the deer. They kill anyone they meet alone on their path. They provoke a real massacre and slaughter unfortunate victims with their swords.
The Vikings rarely committed the atrocities as Judo wrote them. But this isn't surprising because at the same time, the Franks did exactly the same thing, especially Charlemagne in Saxony. The only difference, perhaps, is that Judo made his readers believe the Vikings were acting as if they were pushed by the devil or inspired by demons. But in war, the Franks and the Vikings acted the same way.
It was on these coasts of the English Channel, in a world of shared violence, in this Frankish county already plundered many times by his peers, that Rollo docked around 885 AD. Nothing yet distinguished him from his predecessors. Like them, he intended to advance inland, weapons in hand. His entire destiny would play out here. Medieval archaeologist and specialist in Norman architectural heritage, Jacques Lemau has often followed in Rollo's footsteps during his archaeological research.
We're here in the ruins of the Church of St. Peter of the Jumej Abbey, a large monastery that was burned by the Vikings in 841. About 60 years later, Rollo arrived with his fleet in the port of Jumej. Rollo would have seen this church since its construction was dated by archaeologists as being from the Carolingian period, at around the beginning of the 9th century.
After Jumej, Rollo settled in a winter camp on one of the islands of the Seine. It marked his first desire to settle in the country.
During the first Viking raids, a large part of the river ports of the lower Seine were abandoned by the population. And these abandoned ports were taken over by Nordic groups. These are the same locations that were occupied by Rollo and his men, who made them a real base for their businesses. It can be said that from that point forward, colonization had truly begun.
But diplomacy had too. On the Frank side, 3 men embodied the resistance against the Vikings. King Charles the Simple, Count Robert of Neustria, who held the territories on which Rollo settled, and Franco, the Archbishop of Rouen. His city no longer had any military troops. Franco was all alone to protect the destitute people of his village. So he decided to change his strategy, and for the first time, a high dignitary of the clergy decided to negotiate with the worshipper of the gods Thor and Odin. And Rollo, against all expectations, agreed to meet him. Behind the warrior leader, a supposed barbarian and bloodthirsty beast, hid in reality a particularly skillful political animal.
During the meeting between the Archbishop of Rouen and Rollo, the Archbishop asked Rollo to guarantee the safety of the civilian population that was taking shelter within the walls of the city of Rouen.
It was he who first proposed that Rollo settle in the region by promising him that he would not be bothered by the Franks. So it was a sort of pact between the archbishop and the Viking leader, which was a fundamental element in the Viking settlement of what would later become Normandy.
This pact, known as the Pact of Jumièges, was a first conquest for Rollo. He normalized his relations with the Frankish natives, discovered the workings of the Carolingian administration, and learned the spiritual principles of the Catholic religion. A mutual trust was established between Rollo and Franco. Was this the path to peace? No, it was one of anger and discord. Furious, Charles the Simple refuted the pact between the archbishop and the Viking.
Rollo only reached an agreement with Franco for the Rouen region, where he and his men settled. Don't forget that other Vikings were still coming, and Rollo wanted to remain in charge. He was therefore forced to go farther and farther away to bring back loot and the spoils of pillage. He was doomed to repeat this until he understood that the land he had could feed him and his men. Rollo went even further so that the negotiations would take place with the king, and not only with the archbishop.
So Rollo advanced, plundered, killed, and gave no respite to the Franks. He explored the entire region manu militari between the Seine and the Loire, destroyed the city of Bayeux, and even participated in the siege of Paris. Failing to find a territory in which to take root, one that offered autonomy and freedom, Rollo the Banished, the Exiled, was condemned to this war 100 times over, at the risk of death itself becoming the only acceptable land of asylum. And then one day, before Chartres, which he tried to besiege, a decisive event occurred.
Rollo suffered his first defeat at Chartres. He was surrounded on one side by Robert of Neustria with a powerful army, and on the other by the Bishop of Chartres, who unexpectedly came out of the city, followed by his men-at-arms and, most importantly, by a relic supposed to be miraculous, the tunic of the Blessed Virgin.
Was it divine intervention in the outcome of the fighting, and thus in Rollo's destiny? According to the writings of Dudo of Saint-Quentin, it's practically obvious.
Our Lady's veil can still be admired today. Just walk in the footsteps of Gilles Fresson, historian and intendant of the Chartres Cathedral.
This shrine contains a fragment of the veil of the Virgin, the relic that Mary wore at the time of the Annunciation of the birth of Christ. In 911, it was this garment that was presented on the ramparts and which stopped the advance of Rollo.
Dudon met en scène
Dudo wrote of a Rollo impressed by the relic. In reality, Rollo really suffered his first defeat. But for the Franks, it was also a relative victory because a large number of the Vikings managed to escape and settle at the top of a hill. And when the Franks attacked, an extraordinary surprise awaited them. Besieged, the Normans immediately slaughtered the infinite multitude of animals they had taken with them. When the Franks and the Bourguignons, who had embarked on the pursuit of the Vikings, arrived and discovered the fortification made of the corpses of horses, oxen, donkeys, goats, and sheep, as well as the bloody skins hanging outwards, they said to one another, "Who will attack these men? Who wants to lose their life? Let him approach these monstrous ramparts made of animal flesh." During the Battle of Chartres, at one point, Rollo found himself in an extremely difficult position since he was entrenched with his men on a small hill, completely surrounded by the Franks. He had the beasts skinned and placed all around his camp overnight. So much so that at daybreak, the Franks were frightened and believed that a general massacre was about to happen. Rollo took the opportunity to escape by passing between their ranks. That's how he got away.
And this vision of terror also encouraged King Charles the Simple to negotiate. For Rollo, it was the end of looting and murderous raids. The Viking leader and the Frankish king, thanks to the mediation of Archbishop Franco, agreed to meet. This decisive yet little-known event changed the course of the history of France. They agreed to meet, but where? To find out, we must follow Jean-Marie Lévesque, director of the Normandy Museum in Caen.
The treaty between the Viking leader Rollo and the Frankish princes took place in Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, on the banks of a river, which is not surprising since natural elements delimited territorial principalities.
Saint-Clair-sur-Epte was thus the scene of an improbable diplomatic summit that hinged, as is often the case, on mistrust and political calculation.
All the major players on the political scene at the time were gathered for this treaty, which marked Rollo's entry into the sociability of the nobles of the kingdom. Even before the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, there were agreements between the leader of the Vikings and the Archbishop of Rouen to avoid looting and negotiate an armed peace with Normans, who thus became the de facto protectors of the Church.
The king was very interested because Rollo, settling in the Seine Valley, would likely block the arrival of other Vikings. And effectively, that's what happened. There were no more Viking incursions via the Seine, which had previously been the main axis of entry used by the Vikings.
At first, it was a question of making Rollo the protector of the region. This was the perfect move. A Viking was in charge of putting an end to the Viking raids. Rollo agreed.
Wait.
There was just one small issue. The territory Rollo coveted already belonged to this man, Robert of Neustria.
Normandy is located on a vast territory which was the ancient kingdom of Neustria and which was controlled by Count Robert. It was therefore on land controlled by Count Robert that the new Norman Count Rollo would settle. This was probably a well-calculated political game on Robert's part, a balancing act between Carolingian power and his own power. No doubt he had found a way to calm a situation in the territory of Normandy and anticipate an alliance that could be useful to him later.
Robert might have thought that an alliance with Rollo would allow him to accede to the throne of France. Robert of Neustria agreed to donate the territory to Rollo.
Everyone played their cards in a political game that remained quite unstable between the ambitions of some, the raids that continued against the Vikings, and the different princes surrounding the future territory of Normandy. All this was a rather complex political game, and balances were struck according to alliances.
In this subtle fool's game at the water's edge, it was each man for himself, and just prior to agreeing, Rollo retracted. Because of looting, the territory granted to him had become a country without resources. He demanded more land to support his men.
Rollo suddenly revived the negotiation with King Charles the Simple, and he demanded a land to pillage and a sworn oath from the king and other nobles of the kingdom. This was a way of forcing the Franks to commit themselves definitively.
After the exile, after the bloody battles, after the diplomatic subtleties, Rollo obtained his expanded territory, circumscribed by rivers, as was the custom. Preserved in the National Archives of Paris, this royal charter of 918 is material proof of this agreement between Rollo the Viking and the Franks. The Pact of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte thus marked the birth of what would soon be called the Duchy of Normandy. Remember that Normandy means the land of the men of the north. No Viking before Rollo, and none since, have been able to establish outside Scandinavian borders a durable Norman territory, a Normandy. But in the great chess game of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, one man had not yet advanced all his pawns. It was Franco, the Archbishop of Rouen. He served even higher interests. He played for God. He asked the pagan Rollo to become a Christian.
The Franks won't be able to attack you for no reason if you become a Christian.
Rollo was certainly a very skilled leader, very knowledgeable about what was happening in this diplomatic game. But there was a limit to how far Rollo could integrate into this diplomatic game. The limit was that he was a pagan leader. Thus, Rollo's integration into the society he wished to settle in, where he aspired to build lasting alliances, necessarily happened through baptism.
It was here in Rouen that Rollo completed his conversion. For him, it was a seminal event. It marked the definitive birth of the Duchy of Normandy, of which Rouen became the capital.
here in the north transept of the cathedral. This is where the Church of St. John stood in the 11th century, which is the presumed place of Rollo's baptism in 912.
Charles the Simple, Robert of Neustria, and Archbishop Franco reunited to attend Rollo's baptism. By this baptism, the worshipper of Odin became a Christian prince. The pagan who was banished from Norway found in this Normandy a kind of homeland where all remained to be created, to be invented. For this baptism was also a marriage. Rollo's immense challenge was to unite two cultures, to forge a new identity for him and for his territory. Now he was both Viking and Frank. He was Norman.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
The baptism of Rollo shaped the success of the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. For the Franks, it was a guarantee of respect for churches and monasteries and for Rollo. It was a way to reconcile with the clergy and the local Christian population. Once baptized, Rollo took a Christian name, the name Robert, which was that of his baptismal godfather, Robert, Marquis of Neustria.
Robert of Neustria had only one idea in mind, and that was to restore peace to his lands. And he could only do so by integrating these newcomers from the north. And the only way to integrate them was to convert them to the Christian faith and have them baptized. However, perhaps he intended to make them strong allies for his own politics.
Rollo's baptism was one of the clauses of the territorial agreement for the cession of a territory of Neustria to Rollo. And in the same way, it was necessary that the companions of Rollo themselves be baptized.
The reason was that he wanted to be the Count of Rouen. And he wanted to be obeyed by both the Vikings and the indigenous people who were Christian. Therefore, he had to impose conversion to the Christian faith on all his men.
Rollo thus spoke of a kind of collective baptism of his army, which was perhaps not really a conversion of the heart, but more a necessary formality.
They accepted, but it must be said that this conversion was slow-going and difficult.
The case went as high up as Pope John X. In an astonishing correspondence preserved at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Franco, the Archbishop of Rouen, and Hervéus, the Archbishop of Reims, questioned the Pope on how to react.
The letter from the Archbishop of Reims, Hervéus, said that his colleague of Rouen asked him, and I quote, "What should be done when the Normans who were baptized and renamed, and then after their baptism returned to their crimes by killing Christians, tricking priests, and eating beasts sacrificed to idols?" And there, Hervéus replied that the clerics of Rouen must have a lot of patience with these new converts, because the Christian faith is a demanding one. He dared to compare these young converted Vikings to fragile flowers that the wind blows among the rocks. There was no lack of humor in the writings of the Archbishop.
There was also no lack of imagination, because Rollo was not exactly a fragile flower, unless he was a thorny one. The exiled Viking became sedentary. The warrior became a diplomat. The pagan became a Christian. He still had one last mission to complete: founding the institutions of his new homeland of Normandy. Patiently, he imagined and built an entire administrative and institutional architecture that guaranteed the power and stability of the region and gave him total power.
According to Dudo, Rollo enacted new laws. And what's very interesting is that these laws applied to all the inhabitants of the territories. That is, on one hand, the Normans, or the former Vikings, and on the other hand, the Franks, who were there before. There was no distinction in origin, as was commonly made at the time.
It's said in particular that during a hunting party, Rollo rested at the edge of a pond and, to test the honesty of the peasants, hung a few gold rings on an oak tree. His rings remained there for 3 years. I don't know what the sentence would have been if someone had stolen his rings, but no doubt it would have been an extremely severe and exemplary one.
Gold rings hanging from a tree, and woe to he who risked touching them. Rollo knew how to rule by inspiring fear, but not only fear, he was also a man of conciliation.
Once the county was acquired by Rollo, he had the ability to keep the structures in place and was able to add certain Scandinavian specificities. So much so that when the Viking elite settled in the new country, they integrated with pragmatism and adapted with ease.
Come on! Rollo! Come on!
The mission that Rollo received was to defend the territory over which he had been granted political power. So he fought against the other Viking bands who attacked Normandy. And the Norman Vikings also fought against the Bretons, for example, on the western front of Normandy.
But the real threat to Rollo arose from another part of the country. At the head of the Frankish kingdom, King Charles the Simple saw his authority increasingly challenged by the great local lords. And one man advanced irreversibly towards power. Robert of Neustria.
There was a dispute between Charles the Simple and the Duke of Neustria. Remember that the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte was negotiated between Rollo and the King of France, and Robert of Neustria was completely excluded. That was just one incident of many.
And so Robert of Neustria succeeded in persuading a majority of the nobles to choose him as king.
Robert of Neustria and the other nobles overthrew the Carolingian king. He asked Rollo for his collaboration, but Rollo remained loyal to the Carolingians, with whom he had signed a treaty.
Robert of Neustria swore to take his Norman lands back from Rollo, but didn't have time. He died a year after his ascension to the throne. His son-in-law, Raoul, succeeded him, and he invaded Normandy.
The Franks! The Franks! The Franks! Traitors! Normans! You have been living in peace on these lands for 10 years!
The moment the Franks crossed over to try and reconquer the land that had been given to the Normans, it was an act of war. And that very act, I must say, shattered the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. Rollo obviously resisted what was, in a way, a disgrace. He remained loyal to the King of France, Charles the Simple. He was not forgiven for doing so. And the newcomers, Raoul of Burgundy, the Vermandois, and all those Franks wanted to recover the Norman lands for their own benefit.
This was Rollo's last great battle. Remaining loyal to the deposed King Charles the Simple, he opposed the Frankish insurgents. A fierce and bloody battle began between the two sides. Death came very close.
The Frankish chronicler Flodoard recounted in great detail a siege that happened in Eu between Rollo and the Franks. Rollo seemed to have been seriously wounded during this siege. Nevertheless, at the end of the battle, a new agreement was reached.
So went the extraordinary saga of Rollo. Once again, he claimed victory and even expanded the boundaries of his Normandy. One last battle, one last treaty. Rollo's conquest served a whole dynasty of Dukes of Normandy who came after him, all his descendants.
Le Duchy of Normandy, créé par Rollo.
The Duchy of Normandy, created by Rollo in 911, experienced its hour of glory under his direct descendant, William the Conqueror. But eventually fell into the hands of Philip Augustus in 1204. The same Philip Augustus who attached the duchy to the French royal domain 3 centuries later.
3 siècles plus tard.
Within this temple rests Rollo, father and first Duke of Normandy, devastated and founded by him. Out of strength after his labor, he died in 933 at over 80 years of age. Today, the tomb of Rollo is in the cathedral, but it's likely that his sepulchre was outside originally, in front of one of the doors of the church. Rollo behaved as a Christian once he was baptized. We know that most likely on the eve of his death, he made significant donations to the church.
Mystery accompanied the great destiny of Rollo until the very end, right up until his death. No one knows the date or the place where he breathed his last breath.
Without Dudo's writings, we would never have known the details of Rollo's life. Even though it sometimes seems that it's more of a panegyric than a true history of Rollo. Thanks to him, we know how Rollo was able to found the Duchy of Normandy. The other Normandies that existed at the time, Ireland, England, and Brittany, those Normandies didn't last very long. Only the Normandy of Neustria lasted in the long term, because Rollo made the decision to integrate completely with his men by renouncing their faith, their customs, and their language.
The tireless quest of passionate researchers gradually revealed the extraordinary destiny of a hero forgotten by history. But much work remains to be done for the legend to be more on the side of historical truth. Even today, this 11th century manuscript containing the work of Dudo of Saint-Quentin the man who first told the story of Rollo hasn't revealed all its secrets.
On this page here, you see the faces of two people, one behind the other.
Yes, you're right.
It's a dry point drawing, so in fact, there is no line drawn on the page. With dry point, you leave a slight indentation.
Sitting on the throne, it could be the king of Daci, who expelled and banished Rollo. This Rouen manuscript, which contains the work of Dudo, has a number of blank pages. Further examinations have shown that there were some attempts at illustrations and drawings. It's possible that one day, with more advanced scientific means, we will learn more about this first Norman, the first of a people who conquered England, then Wales, Scotland, and even southern Italy, Sicily, and the Principality of Antioch.